What do we make of that? I suppose there were any number of things Jesus could have done after that resurrection morning. But can you picture it? He's on the shore of a beach. He's watching frustrated fishermen, and he tells them, cast your nets on the other side and you'll be lucky. I don't know how he knew it, but it's part of the story. But he invites them to a meal. And he cooks for them. Can you imagine Jesus cooking bread and fish and feeding people on the beach? Feeding his disciples. And by the way, this was the bunch that had betrayed him just a few days earlier. In fact, if you read the rest of the 21st chapter, he confronts Peter with his thrice denial by asking him 3 different times, do you really love me? It's an interesting connection. But I'm struck that of all the things Jesus could have done with his disciples in the brief times that they believed that they saw him, that it was over a meal, a home-cooked meal cooked by Jesus, and he sat and he ate with them. We are challenged in our culture to find time for all of the pressures in life. And very often in the pressures of life, it is the most important things that get canceled out. It's the most important things that are often the easiest to neglect. You all knew, many of you knew, of the TV dinners and that whole phenomenon. We have a culture and many generations who think that being detached, even though in the same house, is having a meal together. It's important to eat together. I think about the words that Wendell Berry wrote in his poem that Sue read this morning. I tremble with gratitude for my children and their children who take pleasure in one another. If we are ever going to have children and grandchildren who take pleasure in one another, it is going to require of us to sacrifice some of the toys and time-wasting devices that take us away from the things that really matter in life. I tremble with gratitude, Wendell Berry writes, for my children and grandchildren who take pleasure in one another. At our dinners together, the dead enter and pass among us in living love and memory. When I sit at table with family and friends, I usually quote my grandfather, Bucher, or my grandmother. Great stories. My grandfather hated cats. My grandmother loved them. I'll never forget this story. She had Siamese cats. And when Grandpa went to sleep at night, the Siamese cat, knowing somehow that he didn't like the cat, always ended up on his bald head in bed when he was asleep. And when the cat passed on to cat heaven, Grandma went out against Grandpa's wishes to get another cat. And my younger brother Well, I only have a brother and no sisters, but my brother said to her, Grandma, Grandpa doesn't like cats. And you didn't ask him about the cat, and you've got a cat. And my grandmother said, in her own inimitable style, it is easier to ask forgiveness than permission. The dead enter when we, in living, loving memory and heavenly joy, recount the stories to multiple generations of our forefathers and mothers. You can't do that over television dinners and being glued to the tube or to a notebook. I'm not a Luddite. I'm not against technology. I'm just for family meals. I'm for people eating together. I'm for looking at each other in the eyes and for meaningful engagement. I truly believe we would have far less the internet romances and breakups that occur if we had real relationships in human form. But out there, in some nebulous cyberspace, the grass always looks greener over someone else's cesspool. In other words, we need to learn to love the ones we're with. And that requires time. That requires shutting the television off, the technology off, and sitting and preparing and going through the rituals of food, real food preparation, and setting the table and eating together. I just read some data. Bullying is on the radar these days, as you know, and I teach a course on bullying prevention. I read research recently that says that families who eat together tend to have children who function better in society and don't, and it directly impacts bullying in a positive manner. We need to value the ones we're with. The people we're with are more important than the PC or the Mac. The people we're with is more important than Netflix. The people that we're with is more important than anything else we can possibly do. And we need to take the sacredness of time and give it to each other. And in the last lines of Wendell Berry's poem, and so the young are taught. I'm delighted that in our church every Sunday morning we go to breakfast and we try to get the kids to go too. Because it takes a village to raise a child. And all of us, whether we live alone or we live with others, need the fellowship and the communion of the common meal. Amen.